This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully Lord. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins.
Good day. Welcome to Step Beyond the Fire. My name is Steve Miller, and I'm serving as the guest host while Cully and his wife welcome their newborn baby into their family. Today, I have the pleasure to chat with a friend of mine, Rosi Mulholland. Rosi and I worked together for over 20 years. Rosi is recognized as a prescribed fire landscape artist. She began her career by studying forestry and wildlife at both the University of Maine and in Orono and the University of Florida. She worked as a biologist for the Florida Park Service and became the Florida Park Service Prescribed Fire Coordinator. She was pivotal in the development of the Central Florida Prescribed Fire Council. And so, welcome, Rosi.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here today.
And so, Rosi, I would like it. I gave you kind of a brief introduction, but can you fill in sort of the spaces I probably left undone of your career and how you got involved in fire?
Sure, Steve. Well, I didn't really get involved at all with fire because it just wasn't part of academic curriculums back in the dark ages when I was in school. So that's in the 80s, 1980s, not 1880s. And so I really, although, yes, I had heard about the use of prescribed fire because, I took lots of forestry classes and things, but no one really did it. And at the time that I was at University of Florida, although they have much more of a fire program now, and they did have Austin Carry Forest, but it really wasn't, it wasn't a burning wasn't really part of the mix there at that point. So I really did not get into fire until I joined the Florida Park Service, which goes back to 1984. And I was hired by Jim Stevenson. And most people in Florida that are in the fire community know who Jim Stevenson is. And he was the Florida Park Service naturalist, which was the original title that we used for biologists in the Florida Park Service system, the statewide naturalist. And so he hired me into the Florida Park Service. And Jim was way ahead of his time as far as recognizing the benefits of growing season fire. And fire as a holistic management tool for all kinds of the fire type ecosystems we have in Florida. So I started to get a fire education pretty quickly through Jim, who, had done a lot of his personal education with working with the Comerics, with tall timbers, and helping coordinate the very first Florida Park Service burn. So had all the benefit of what Jim was constantly feeding all of us as far as what was important from an ecological standpoint. And then I actually started working at Wekiwa Springs State Park in Central Florida. And Wekiwa Springs had and still has a very active fire program. And so I just became a low-level grunt on, the entry-level crew of the fire team there, which was phenomenal. And we burned a lot. We had almost no equipment. We constantly banged heads with the Florida Forest Service, which was called something different at that point. But we were hard to get on the same page with each other. Some of us were on the pages with each other, but there was a lot of rocks that banged against each other. And there were things like notices of violation and plowing that we didn't like because we were working a lot on ground cover. But it all just forged a great fire education. So the Florida Park Service taught me about burning. And because of doing a lot of burning, I got to see ecological effects of burning, which has always really, really been my obsession more than anything else about fire is how do I want to manipulate with this fire to produce something that I'm looking for? Maybe not after one burn, but maybe after 5 burns.
So, in telling us that part of your history, you brought up something that's really important, which is, I too started prescribed fire in the 80s, and back then it was just fire yes or fire no, and nobody really hadn't. I don't think they'd started to ask the questions about fire when, meaning the seasonality of it, and so. I know early on there were many entities who were opposed to us starting to do growing season fire. Why do you think that transition to accepting growing season fire was so important for all of us?
I think it was important to all of us because it took us a while to understand, well, what's the differences that we're going to see and produce when we're shifting from wintertime burning, because most of the burning used to be kind of be done by March, right? Or am I going too late even? I mean, there was kind of these rules about, oh my gosh, you can't burn past then, or you can't start burning before a certain time in the fall because you're going to hurt the pine trees and you're going to do this. And what are you thinking? But I think people that started to push that time envelope into looking at, and this was a lot of the, I don't think Jim Stevenson would be upset if I say dogma, Jim Stevenson's dogma, which he had studied a lot on and talked with fire experts, that when we started pushing into the natural growing season and really, once you started thinking about it, okay, Florida, tons of lightning strikes. We can have lightning storms in December, but that's not when we have the bulk of our lightning storms. So, it becomes a logic sequence of like, well, if we had most of our lightning storms in June, July, when did we have most of our fires? Hence, if you're trying to approximate something more natural for the benefit of the systems, the ecological functions in the system, well, you ought to get maybe yourself to that time of year, which was the growing season. And we just started to see the effects of like, wow, I haven't seen wiregrass bloom. That wiregrass is now blooming, which it seems like it's crazy talk now in Florida to say, I've never seen a bloom on a wiregrass plant, because it's like, how can you not have seen, if you've looked at wiregrass now, how could you not have seen a blossom on it? And that's because lots of people are doing growing season burning. And yeah, and there's a lot of stuff to fine tune there. A growing season burn is not always your best burn to go with, especially if you're dealing with these fire suppressed areas that you know of. If you go out there and do your growing season burn first, because, hey, that produces great ecological effects, you've now got a charred forest. And you still have your ground cover, but there ain't any trees left.
That's sort of like me deciding I'm going to go run in a marathon. I don't start with the marathon. I start with the 5K and work my way up. And so,
that's why we call it a fire prescription.
You reduce the fuels until you can get to that point. And
that's a good idea. Not always how it gets executed, but yeah.
And I have seen things like we discovered Bartram zixia, which is a listed plant species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In one of the burn zones, and folks were nervous about burning in the burn zone because of the Bartram zixia. Yet all the literature says Bartram zixia is dependent upon fire. So, have you got advice for folks who are sitting there knowing they have to make some omelets, but worried about breaking some of those early eggs?
Well, don't put all your eggs in one basket. That would be a good ism. If you're not sure, and if we want to use like a plant like Bartram's Ixia, and you've got it all in one burn zone, well, maybe you ought to figure out some way to separate part of it out in case you screw up, or the conditions just aren't right, because we, as much as we think we know, the more you burn, the more you realize you don't know what's going on ecological effects, because you'll try to do something that is following something that worked in the past, and it's like, oh crap, that is not. So if you've got like, and I think really old growth pine trees are another really good example. No, they're not a listed species, whatever. You can grow a pine tree in 250 years kind of thing. But if you have a lot of old growth longleaf pine, which we don't have a lot of that left in Florida anymore, and other people will be in that same situation, and you have a burn tract that has a lot of it in it, and you're maybe not quite sure, have I really got the duff levels down enough? Should I push it on the envelope of, I'm going to give this the best summertime fire? It could just be too much for it because of all kinds of other conditions you haven't necessarily been able to access. So to me, it's no different than an endangered species. Don't don't toast them all at once, in case it goes wrong. So just subdivide, and that doesn't, you can be creative about subdividing. You can subdivide by moisture. It doesn't have to be a hard break, especially if you're working on ground cover restoration. You don't want to put another artificial division in, but maybe you can do it with mowing. You can do a wet lining. Just don't overcommit and be wrong.
Yeah, be a little wrong, not very wrong.
Right. Kill a few, but not all. Yeah, don't have to admit that I'm the person who eliminated Bartram's Ixia from this management area.
So no, you and I started working in fire about the same time, and there's some aspects of starting in the 80s that were good, was because you had a little more space for flexibility. Smoke management had fewer highways and hospitals and airports and all of those kinds of things. But there are a lot of tools now, and there is a lot more common understanding of things like the value of growing season fire and whatever. And you and I each have kids who are working in the field, so to speak. So imagine you're sitting down there with your somebody new, like our kids when they were starting out in the field. What would you sit down and tell that new person who's about to begin a fire management career?
I guess one of the big things, which I don't necessarily know that I am a great example of, because but we always tell our kids the things, right, that we should do better than we did. I try to really encourage new fire managers, and a manager implies to me a little bit that they're already a burn boss, but I'm really talking right from the get-go. Your first, entry into it is at the crew level is, don't be in too much of a rush to get like from crew level to burn boss. Try to take all the steps, because there's a lot of benefit in each of the steps. And then for an actual burn manager, I think my biggest advice would be patience. We are dealing with systems that have not just missed one or two burn rotations, and Florida is a relatively short burn rotation in general on our fire types. But when you have an area that hasn't burned for 20 to 30 years, and a lot of times you don't know that exactly, well, it's missed maybe 10 burn rotations if it's a sandhill, because it's a 2 to 3 year cycle. So you shouldn't look at that and then think, well, I'm going to produce this diverse ground cover and stuff with this one burn I'm going to apply. So again, it's kind of the eggs not in all in one basket thing, is patience to understand that I don't know everything I would think I know. The things I do know, it's not a perfect system out there. And that I need to work on things like taking off the duff layer. And maybe it's going to take me 3 non-growing season burns or more to get myself to a growing season burn. And then the other thing, because many fire managers, we really like black, and we feel unfulfilled when we look at our burn and hopefully we're doing our after assessment and follow-ups to see, how did it go? Did it produce what I wanted? What are we going to do different next time? It's okay to have some green out there, and we really need to have some green out there because we want that diversity and mosaic in the system, and that's more an ecological effect. And as long as our fire lines are secure, okay, we might not want all the cabbage palms to be unburned right next to the fire line and we have smoldering going on. That's not the green patch I'm looking for. But if we have a nice oak, I call them oak mottes, these clumps of oaks that could be really old in some of our burn areas, we don't have to see those charred every single time to think we were successful, because there's a lot of diversity out there, and because of our systems are out of whack, we need that diversity for some of our seeding that happens in the transition zones. So don't rush, be patient. Okay, that's probably a really long answer.
So you and I both started out in having the flexibility of sort of being ground pounders with drip torches, and we both worked our way up to the point where we became much more administrators. We still had the chance to get out occasionally. But some of the folks who are listening here are going to be more on the administrator end, that are going to be fostering fire programs. So what advice would you give those folks who have migrated into administration about helping their um, fire crews be successful in building or maintaining a fire program?
Here's what I found.
Yeah, Siri jumped in there to try and help me.
Siri jumped in there. It's like, could she answer this question for me? Because that might be more politically correct. I don't know. Okay, so as a fire administrator, what would you want to keep a fire administrator? What should they keep in mind for their fire teams? Well, one thing is not to forget how hard it is to burn and have it always come out perfect. And I don't mean that people should be unaccountable for their actions, because we can sometimes do some really boneheaded things, and it's like, why did I decide that? But burning is hard, and it isn't always real predictable. So I think as an administrator, it's really important to listen to the staff and try to really get a handle on, because a lot of times, unfortunately, as a fire administrator, you're coming in because something has gone wrong. Um, uh, because you get that pressure from above you, and you're supposed to, like, why did they smoke out that highway? It's like, well, okay, yes. So often we are coming at our teams in kind of a negative context, and we're kind of the buffer between the teams. So I just be cautious about that as a fire administrator, and try to work a lot with the people on the ground, and that means you should get out of the office. You got to spend time with the people in the field. You don't have to be in charge of the burns, but you need to be on burns and go through the whole cycle and see how, what are the problems with equipment, what are problems that are going on with, I don't know, ecological changes as far as climate and those kinds of things, which you see over time. So just be really, really supportive of those teams, and, you know, just advocate a lot for your people and try to solve their problems. The stuff that bogs them down, if it's administrative, which a lot of times it is, try to run interference for them. Or try to figure out a way that they can work around it, or you work around it, so they're not wasting their time.
So when I was working for Eric Marzov, he referred to our job as administrators to be the blockers, so that the people in the field could be the running back and score touchdowns. Obviously, a football metaphor. Um, so
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's good, and I think until somebody in an administrative position, until they leave, I frequently think that uh, the field staff may not, and I don't know that I don't think it's their job to completely understand that, but I don't think there's maybe, if you're a good blocker, the people below you, they're not, you're not spending time telling them how much you're being pounded because on the other side of you, because it's not your job to tell them that stuff. That's why you're there. But um yeah, when that blocker leaves, man, it hurts at a low level. I can say that from personal experience, from people leaving. No names
yeah,
mentioned.
I believe I understand that where that was directed. Quickly
Mm.
switching the topic, which is um, having worked in Florida most of my career and working other places primarily on wildfire assignments, and now working in the northeastern 20 states with regard to primarily prescribed fire. I can say that there is a difference between the spirit of collaboration um, that you experience in Florida and elsewhere. And I liken it to, or I think some part of the root cause of that was in '98, we all faced a really big challenge, and I think had a real wake up call of how interdependent we were. And afterward, just came out of it recognizing that we needed to be way more independent and collaborative. Um, so, share with me what you think. If you can either disagree with me as to the cause, or but share with me the importance that you think collaboration plays in success.
Oh my God, when you screw up, you need a lot of friends. Boy, when things go bad, you want all your friends to show up, and that, I mean, obviously that's not the only time you want friends, but that's the time you really need friends, because you're being eaten alive by people who aren't your friends. So you really need to get. I mean, the thing for me about interagency collaboration is, supposedly we're all on the page that there needs to be prescribed fire applied for all kinds of whatever our individual missions might be, but we all collectively believe in prescribed fire. And if one of us fails, all of us fail. There's no difference. And I'm not good at remembering quotes, but I think there's a really good Stephen Pine quote about how fire in Florida is different
Yep, he takes
because
that elsewhere in the world. When fire divides, in Florida, it brings people together.
fire unites or something like that. Yes, because the public has no clue and they don't really care. Whoever's fire it is, it's fire, and you're there as whatever, a personal, homeowner, land manager that lit the fire, an agency person that lit the fire. It's just fire, and you need a united front, because there's fire is just so foreign to people outside the fire business that you can't do it by yourself. And you've got to have those other people on your page to some extent, to just be successful, because you've got to get an authorization. You got to have some grace. Your smoke is going to go into a subdivision sometimes. It's going to go across a road sometime. And you need other people to be there to say, well, okay, they had a wind shift, and that's not something they could anticipate. And that's, National Weather Service in Florida is sticking up for us, or National Weather Service in Florida is calling us on the fire line to say, hey, we screwed up the fire weather forecast this morning, and your smoke in 1 hour is going to go over top of I-95. You better do something quick. Like, oh, yes. Oh, crap. And I never realized how different Florida was, because I certainly did my share of moaning about different agencies and applications of fire, yada, 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 until I went out of state, which happened to be to Washington State, to do a talk. And it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe how good we have it in Florida. I cannot believe it. I'm never complaining again. And I'm going to go back to my happy place of Florida and burn.
You brought up something excellent in your discussion of collaboration, which was the Angie Agneti was I think she still is the lead meteorologist out of the Jacksonville office of the National Weather Service. And when she got there, she quickly learned how integrated a role that they at the Weather Service play with the prescribed fire community, and how big it is. And yeah, she built this communication network of, if the forecast changes, she and her team have a way of sending it out to everybody. And that's a real strong sense of ownership that is probably rare, but certainly appreciated.
I think it is. And I always dealt primarily with the Melbourne office, which was very much the same. And we're always supportive, always willing to talk with you. And if you called them about the fire weather forecast and went, look, here's what I'm trying to burn. You've got this dispersion index really, really low. We have not been seeing this on, especially when you're repetitively burning. So because you've been dealing with lots of forecasts. What's the deal with this dispersion index? And do I really need to call it off because of this kind of thing? What is happening? What is happening with the sea breeze? Are you right on the sea breeze? Is it really going to come at 11 o'clock today? Because it usually comes at 1. Yeah. And part of that is their on fire incidences that John Pendergrass from, the Melbourne office is a bigwiggy guy on national incidents.
But you pointed out something really important, which is you're asking for refinement of the forecast that you need, but giving them feedback that you've witnessed so that they can effectively refine it on your behalf.
Correct.
And it's that regular interchange back and forth between entities that are partnering that I think is critical.
Yes. And, just like you should get to know your local area forester by first name and recognize them in the grocery store for your county. When I was burning a lot, I would occasionally get messages back on my spot forecasts that I had requested from National Weather Service that would say, "Hey, Rosie, this is John. Hope it's going good. Hope the burn day turns out like you want it to be." And it's like, well, that's pretty cool when the fire weather forecaster knows who they're talking to. It's good. It's a good feeling.
Yeah. Yes. And you're right. When you operate in a world that is collaborative and sort of, I'm going to refer to it as safe, because the partners are all sort of paddling in the same direction. You can become complacent and expect it to always be like that. But one visit to someplace else that isn't the occasion
quickly smartens you up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
there are some cool Rosieisms, and we've talked about a couple of them tangentially. You used to close out your emails with fire frequency trumps fire seasonality. But one of the other ones I love, and I've attributed it to you, and I've used your quote, which is, "Your perfect's getting in the way of my pretty good." How does that apply to land management and fire management?
Right. Well, I used that when we used to try to teach a class just on fire planning to a lot of our burn managers in the Park Service. Trying to get them to think long range throughout the year of like, when am I going to fit? I got these many acres to burn. How am I going to fit them all in? And so I came at fire from the biological side of the house. And the biological side of the house can have a lot of perfectionists in it, of which I would put myself in holding myself to a pretty perfectionist standpoint. But we should be striving for excellence, not perfection. And so in the fire planning world, if you want everything to be perfect, because you're looking for this one set of ecological effects. Well, you're not burning enough. So that's where I'm okay. I'd love to have perfect burning conditions, but it's statistically impossible. I'm not going to get those every cycle that I need to burn a tract. So, if I've let it go long enough and I've been waiting for perfect and it ain't happening, you can't keep waiting for perfect. You need to take a good. And okay, I really want to burn this in the growing season, but now I had this on a 3-year rotation. Now I'm on year number 5. I haven't managed to burn it yet. Well, I'm going to take a good. I'm going to burn it I should go out there and burn it in the dormant season so I don't build up way too much fuel accumulation. So, we can get ourselves into a really tight box with our burning prescriptions, so tight that we don't ever really have to worry about burning. And for some folks, that's their objective. So, yeah, this is not an encouragement to be sloppy, but don't be so much of a perfectionist that you can't accept something less than perfect to make sure you're still moving in a forward direction. Don't let yourself go backwards because you're waiting for perfect.
I'm impressed that you managed to weave together frequency trumps seasonality, and don't let your perfect get in the way of my pretty good kind of thing, and you tied those together beautifully.
There are some people certain biologists that just cannot forgive me for that. Frequency trumps fire season. I'd love to have the right fire season all the time and frequency, but if I have to pick, it should be frequent and then try hit the right fire season as often as possible.
A few episodes ago, Cully interviewed Rick Lint, who's a deputy regional forester for the southern region, and he had been on the Ocala. And Rick regularly goes through this. If you know how many acres you need to do, and that's an important thing, of how many acres do you need to do as sort of the parent to this child of the landscape you're responsible for. Then you factor in how many days is the weather going to be acceptable. And that tells you sort of, it helps identify that need you described of how precise can you be on your exact weather window, because it's going to reduce the number of days you're going to be able to do it. But how important do you think it is that land managers, fire managers know what it is, the ecological fire demand is what I like to refer to it as. How important do you think that is for them to be successful, that they know that?
And what do you mean by ecological fire demand?
So if you have
the return interval, what a certain system needs?
So if you have 15,000 acres of longleaf sandhill, and we agree that 2 years is the approximate return interval we want, that means we got to do 7,500 acres a year. How important do you think it is that the fire managers, land managers have that in their head and are staying focused on that need?
Oh, well, again, I'm a fire effects burn manager, so it's n- it's never been out of my head. So I don't think you can produce the quality you're looking for on the output side if you don't keep that in your head. Uh, and I don't think it has to be, again, I don't think it has to be perfect. The world isn't going to come to an end if I don't burn my sandhills every 2.5 years, but it isn't very good if I'm only burning them once every 10 years and claiming I'm successfully managing longleaf turkey oak sandhills kind of deal just by reporting my acres burned kind of figure. So no, I think the best burn managers have those numbers in their head, and they understand the weather that they need to produce things. They have all the other pieces that they have problem with. How often can I get the crew I need? Do I have the equipment I need? What's going on with roads and constraints around me? Those are the most successful fire managers. Yeah, there's not enough days. There's very few programs that have enough days where everything is going to align.
So you just went through sort of a list of the things from the wildland urban interface that make prescribed fire more complex than it used to be. And how important do you think? So this is a two-part question. First one is, how important do you think the social license is for people to support what prescribed fire managers are trying to do? And then what are some of those things that they can do to either build or protect the social license they have or they need?
Um, uh, well, I think the social license is absolutely critical. Um, I don't see. I mean, this is speaking from Florida, where almost all our burning is some kind of urban interface. I mean, there are a few areas that, national sites that are large enough that, maybe they can, people see the smoke, but it doesn't come out of the area too much. So most of us in Florida have not had any much margin as far as not of screwing up the social license for a long time. I mean, sometimes we ignore it, and that usually doesn't do us good. So I just think Florida, we just have this constant problem of influx of people, and collective memory seems to be extremely short no matter what you do. And I don't think that's unique to Florida. I'm not making a Florida slam there. So you have to just constantly retrain people that it's okay to do fire. And there's more tools now, but I don't think anyone can ever do enough PR. And we got into that kind of early at Wakaiwa Springs, where we spent a lot of time talking to a lot of our neighbors because we had boundaries that were right up against their houses. And when we got to a point where people would call us and ask, "Hey, don't you burn that area about every 2 to 3 years? Am I right about that? And when are you coming back?" And it's like, that's a great phone call. And it's like, yeah, you're right. We need to be there. But if you have someone that's gotten that much understanding of how this benefits them and you, and then the second half was, how do you protect and build that? You have to do it. um, and it never ends, and it kind of gets old after a while, because it's like, oh my gosh, haven't I sold the virtues of prescribed burning versus a wildfire and how this affects smoke? Haven't I sold this enough to be out of that business? Uh, and I guess also I have one little story which I'll try to keep short. Knowing when you're not going to sell it. And that also comes from Okiowa Springs State Park, where I happened to be working the the park always burns right along the main park drive, and the park never closes purposely, never closes for a prescribed burn, or rarely. It has to be something really unusual. And we always use it as an opportunity, as another interpretive opportunity. So that's part of it. Take every interpretive opportunity you've got. And I had a person stop and say, "What are you guys doing?" And you start going into your prescribed burn spiel about all the values, blah, 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 blah. And then he just looks at me and he goes, I bet there's some biologist that told you you should do that. And I looked at my burn shirt. And at that point, we never had any name tags or anything like that on our shirts. But I glanced down at my shirt to look, do I have my park biologist name tag on this shirt? And it's like, I don't. And it's like, and that was when I decided this conversation is not going anywhere. I was like, thank you very much for visiting the park, and you should come back in 2 weeks and see how great this area looks, because the grass is going to grow back.
Near the end of the time you and I were working together, I remember we had a lightning fire over at Hal Scott. So very urban interface, right outside of Orlando. And Facebook had all these conversations, and it was a night fire. It was occurring at night, which that's not an area where we could prescribe burn intentionally at night. And nobody called it in because they were so used to prescribed burning. It's a prescribed burn, and by the next day it had burned out to 2 creeks. And the field staff went out and said, yeah, it turned out lovely. But other than the dialogue in Facebook, they were so conditioned that property is burned with fire that nobody felt the need to call it in.
Right. And that's right by, especially the Wedgefield subdivision, which has been a Firewise community for a very, very long time. And yes, people were really used to seeing fire. So that's great. That's when you've done, well, maybe we've done our job a little bit too well. It never hurts to check in. So yeah, but it's constant. You can never let your foot off the pedal for social license, because it turns on you so fast, and it just speeds up all the time.
Or it expires because it has, as you pointed out, it sort of has a shelf.
Yeah, it has a shelf life. Yeah, which can be kind of short.
So we're winding down here. First, thanks so much. I always enjoy chatting with you, and
all right, likewise. You're welcome.
I think you have great stuff to share with folks that they can benefit from. And so towards that, you got a minute or so left. What is that soundbite message you really want to leave people with?
I don't know. That's okay. I don't know, Steve. Burn often, burn safe, keep at it. Pyrodiversity promotes biodiversity.
Those were fabulous t-shirts, by the way.
Don't let go. Don't let go of a fire program without a really hard fight. But burn smart. Burn a lot and burn smart.
Cool. Thanks, Rosi. And again,
you're welcome, Steve.
This was fun to guest host. A step beyond the fire. So, thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Steve. You too.